Good morning, everyone. I'm Damon Wilson. It is fantastic to be here with you in London in the Roundhouse Theatre. I want to thank you. I want to welcome all of you here, both the current and the soon-to-be digital Sherlocks. This is our largest edition. And let me just ask, how many of you are with us at the 360 OS Summit for the first time? Raise your hands if you're here for the first time. It's a big crowd. Who was with us last year in Berlin? Who was with us the year before in Warsaw? All right. This is fantastic. This is about bringing you together year after year to build a community, to build a movement. So I want to start, first of all, just with a thank you. I want to thank you for what you do. You're doing extraordinary work that's critical today. We're grateful for that. I also want to thank you for the time that you're giving us. Time is probably your most valuable commodity, and thank you for giving us your time to come here to London and spend a couple days together. I also really want to thank you for what you're going to do. And I think that's the most important part, how we come out of here knowing what we're going to do, because that's the critical element here. This is about creating a movement. Defending our democracies takes a lot of work. And y'all are at the heart as catalysts of this movement to help trigger that. That also means that by coming, just by enrolling, just by being here, that you're assuming a little bit of a mandate, a sense of responsibility. So this is not meant to be sort of a passive think tank conference. This is meant to be something that you own, help develop, take ownership of, and help drive forward afterwards. So I want to take just a second before we kick off with one of our honored guests to provide a little bit of context about how what we're doing here in London, how the Digital Forensics Research Lab, how that fits into the Atlantic Council and the Atlantic Council's story. Some of you know about that, know about the Atlantic Council, some of you don't. But the Digital Forensics Research Lab is not just an experiment for a traditional Washington think tank. This is core. It's core to our business. It's core to who we are. This is really, in effect, how we operationalize our mission of working together to secure the future. It's how we bring ideas into action, and it's how we actually try to defend democracy, not just talk about how we defend democracy, but defend it. This has been the fastest growing part of the Atlantic Council over the past few years, and we're really proud of that. I think that's a testament to the market demand, if you will, and the problems we're facing. But we also recognize at the Council, at the lab, that we're not going to succeed in this endeavor if the lab does it alone, if we do it alone. That's not how this works. So we built this lab to help provide the tools, the training, the talent to be at the heart of this, but also this process to help bolster the credibility of those of you that are doing this important work, to provide protection in some cases to those of you who are exposed in difficult situations, difficult environments, and also to inspire each other, to learn from each other as we go forward. So the Atlantic Council founders probably could not have imagined what we're doing here now. They couldn't have imagined the Digital Forensics Research Lab. They would have been struck by the venue that we're operating in right now. But I dare say I think our founders would be damn proud. Because in many respects, what we're doing, it's pretty audacious. You know, showing and telling as citizens the story of Russian troops in Ukraine, of defending the oppressed and going after human rights abusers, of safeguarding our elections, the most sacred part of the democratic process. And I think our founders of the Atlantic Council would have been impressed because they were audacious. If you take a moment and step back and think about where we came from, our story came from, we were founded by those that came out of the horrors of World War II. President at the creation, a term of Secretary of State Dean Acheson under Harry Truman, President Truman, and one of the key architects and founders of the Atlantic Council, helped create really something quite different after 2 world wars where we decided that we had to do better. We couldn't repeat this madness. And they set out a completely different sense of grand strategy that required a sense of permanent engagement, constructive engagement in the world. Certainly Americans couldn't be protected by the isolation of 2 great oceans. But to understand that needed to be accompanied by a set of norms and principles and institutions where values and interests were aligned, to help provide a sense of stability, a framework, a rules-based international order. And it recognized that the free world, that the United States would do better as democracy and rule of law spread, that as the world got more prosperous, we would all get more prosperous. That was sort of the grand bargain, understanding this sense of a rules-based international order that's produced really what we enjoy today. And that is what these folks in the Truman administration and then the Eisenhower administration, the Republicans, Democrats, independents, they decided that they had to come together, not as Americans, but as architects of this new order with their allies and friends globally to create the Atlantic Council, a place that is not just a research institute, a think tank. This is about a place that has a mission promoting constructive engagement in the world, where the United States is working hand in glove with its friends and allies to solve the world's biggest challenges. That's what we do. That's who we are. It's about shaping the future. And that's why we're here right now, because we're concerned about that future. In our own research at the Atlantic Council, we've set out where we think and see the world going. And then we've used that research to not only sort of frame the challenge that we face today, but to frame what our strategy is, what our purpose is, what our institution is for. We believe there are several defining challenges of our time. If you look at what's happening globally, it's not so good. We see the return of major power competition with the possibility of major power conflict for the first time in a couple of decades. We see profound doubts about the future of democracy and open markets, and this strange sense of confidence among the authoritarians. We feel around us the breakdown of this rules-based liberal international order that our founders literally helped create. And we sit in Washington and we look around and we see an incredible debate about America's role in the world. For the first time since World War II, the relationship of the United States to the rest of the world is in play. It's a jump ball, a way that our longest-serving board member, Henry Kissinger, has framed that challenge. And then you overlay that with your world, a pace of change, a pace of technological change that has been quite disruptive to our societies, that's enabled disinformation to divide our own societies. And finally, you connect to that with what we've called a leadership deficit. Where are the leaders who are going to rise to the challenge to solve these problems, as we've seen in the past? So all this comes together in what we would argue is a pretty profound global shift taking place right now, a global shift that's fundamentally an inflection point in history, where there will be outside consequences to the decisions that we take today, and the outcome is quite uncertain. And I think that's where all of us come in, because the premise of what we're laying out here is that progress is not inevitable. We're in the fight of our lives. We're in a fight for our values. We're in the fight of a generation. And in many cases, our free societies aren't even aware that we're in that kind of struggle. Many of our adversaries are keenly aware of that. So we need to recognize that despite all the faults, the problems that we've experienced over the past 75 years, we do need to step back and understand that historically speaking, we have just been through the greatest stretch of history of global stability, when more people were lifted out of poverty, enjoyed more sense of security and human dignity in any period in history, period. That was a pretty good run, and it's at risk. When I was born, there were 29 sort of significant democracies. When I went to college, we were up to about 77 democracies. It was about half the world's population. Now we've seen, over the past decade, 1 in every 6 democracies fail. We are in a 10-year democratic recession taking place right now. And you feel it. You just sense that. You don't even need the data. It's why you're here. It's why you do what you do. And it's why that we believe that you are at the pointy edge of the spear. You don't need permission to go into this battle. You've chosen to step into this battle. There's no draft out there. And I think that's the beauty and the power of free societies, that you're empowered to take that decision yourself and get into the arena. So I'm pretty confident, despite the challenges, the defining challenges of our time that I've laid out, I'm pretty confident about the future. I don't see those challenges as a sense of reason for despair, but rather as a call to action for what we're doing. In many respects, the stakes are too high to be ambivalent. The stakes are too high for us to be a traditional think tank. We say at the Atlantic Council, it's not business as usual. We have to up our game. We need a degree of outrageous ambition, kind of like the founders of our institution. And if we think back to what they did, coming out of the horrors of World War, and we are stewards of that tradition, then we need to raise our level of ambition and expectation of what we can do to shape a better future. And that's how the Digital Forensics Lab, that's how this Digital Sherlocks movement fits in to our strategy. It's fundamental to our strategy. It's our answer, in part, to these defining challenges. So we see this effort as helping us navigate major power competition to prevent World War III, a time when Russia, China, Iran, North Korea are using hybrid disinformation tactics. You're helping to expose that. Second, out there to defend democracy, identify, explain, expose disinformation to help ensure that our democratic societies become resilient societies. And at the same time, in turn, it helps to expose the authoritarians and their true vulnerabilities to the tools that you're developing. Third, as we think about the audaciousness of remaking this global system, this effort fits into that as well, because we can't just protect the rules-based order of the past. We do need to think about new norms, new rules, broader stakeholders. We need to bring in technology into this conversation to shape the norms for that future system. And the tech disruption, well, this is an effort to turn it on its head and be focused on how do we harness technology for good. Technology brings enormous opportunity, possibilities of equality. It's what you do. But we recognize that technology is transforming our lives at a pace that humanity has never experienced before. That's disruptive. And so our collective task, I think, is how do we harness this technology for good? Don't be content with letting technology be neutral. And to look up one day and see that the autocrats have used what we've created, they've used your ideas to control their people, to steal from our companies, to coerce our friends. So, in free societies, if we get there in many respects first in this fourth industrial revolution, we'll help set the norms, the standards, we'll help harness technology for good. And if so, we'll help democracies not be vulnerable to this. In fact, we'll show how flexible democratic societies can adapt. And at the end of the day, it's the authoritarians that are brittle and vulnerable. So I also think here it's important that we take a pause because we're focused on international challenges. But we can't lose sight of the home game in each of our countries. The benefits that you've taken advantage of in your work, they're not spread evenly. Technology has been unevenly disruptive, opportunistic across our societies, whether it's villages in the Balkans, villages here in the UK, or the American Midwest. We see some communities that are emptying out, that haven't figured out how to harness this. And I think even as we focused on the challenge in the international system, we've got to have at first our democracy strong at home. Help us through your work get ahead of this building backlash in those communities. And finally, the leadership deficit. That's how this effort, the lab, also fits into our strategy. Democracies allow for disruption. Leaders are tethered to their people. The concerns of our electorates, our populations, have to be taken seriously. They can hold all of us and our leaders accountable. That's a good thing. It means that things are messy. We're subject to waves of bouts of populism. But fundamentally, these systems, our systems are self-correcting. We don't need trolls or others to tell us what we're doing wrong. We hold ourselves accountable and create self-correcting systems. But it requires individuals. It requires people like you to actually act, to have a sense of agency. And I think as we go through this over the next 2 days, let's stay focused and remember, as we talk about the techniques, the challenges, that this is fundamentally about people. Bring your values to your vocation. We're going to deal with open source intelligence, a lot of data, technology, but this is about people. So that means we need to marry the tech, the data, the intelligence with empathy, with ethics, with emotion. Yes, bring some passion to this over the next couple of days, even as we focus on producing dispassionate analysis and products that are evidence-based. Our values, your values, serve as a North Star. They provide a sense of direction, a sense of purpose, a sense of why you do what you do. And we just need to remember that what we are enjoying, this world that we're in, is not a self-executing system. That's where this comes in. That's where you come in. That's where digital Sherlocks come in. You're the vanguard of a movement. You can help shape a future. We need you to help shape a better future. That's how what we're doing today, tomorrow, fits into the Atlanta Council strategy. We're so delighted to welcome you here to London. Thank you. Thank you very much. So with that, we're talking about how ideas matter, that ideas will only become a reality if people do something about them. And that's the perfect introduction and segue for me to introduce to you a remarkable person, Sir Julian King, the European Commissioner for the Security Union. This man has forged a new path within the European Union. He's helped be the architect of how the European Union deals and combats disinformation, and has mapped out a way ahead for our member states, for the societies. Sir Julian is a remarkable leader, someone who's brought a sense of clarity to the mission, but a capability to execute in a very complicated bureaucratic and political environment. I think he's brought courage and consistency to a pretty tough topic that some people didn't understand and some people didn't want to face. He's helped establish a code of practice, which we'll talk about. He's helped establish the EU Action Plan against disinformation, the first of its kind to set out a common vision for these problems to help safeguard elections across the continent. On top of that, he's literally built something new, this concept of a security union, which didn't even exist until he took his job, and now has become an integral part of European leaders' discussions about the future of the EU. So with no further ado, let me invite Sir Julian to the stage. Thank you so much for joining us in London. We're delighted to welcome you here. Welcome.